A millionaire demanded that a humble old man get off the plane because he smelled like animals. 2 days later, the afternoon sun bathed the tarmac of Los Angeles private airport, creating an undulating mirage on the horizon, the roar of jet engines mixed with the buzz of conversation and the clink of champagne glasses. It was just another ordinary day for the rich and famous who frequented that exclusive piece of Californian heaven. However, for Samantha Harrington, there was nothing ordinary about the day. At 35, the heiress to the Harrington cosmetics empire was about to embark on a journey that would change her life forever, although she didn't know it yet. Samantha walked down the red carpet towards her private jet, her Louboutin heels echoing on the tarmac. Her impeccably groomed platinum blonde hair shone in the California sun. She emanated an aura of power and privilege that made the people around her instinctively move away. "Ms. Harrington, welcome aboard," said the pilot, Captain James Anderson, with a rehearsed smile. He knew Samantha's volatile temper well and knew it was best to keep her satisfied. Samantha just nodded, her icy blue eyes scanning the luxurious interior of the plane. She stopped abruptly when she noticed an elderly man sitting in one of the leather seats. George Thompson, 72, a recently retired Vietnam War veteran, looked up and smiled gently at Samantha. He was dressed simply. Worn khaki pants, a faded plaid shirt and a battered baseball cap with the logo of a local animal shelter. "Good afternoon, miss," George greeted in a gruff but warm voice. Samantha frowned, detecting a faint smell of animal hair emanating from the elderly man. Without responding to the greeting, she turned to Captain Anderson, her voice sharp as a razor. "What does that mean?" "I thought this was a private flight," Captain Anderson snorted, uncomfortable. "Well, Ms. Harrington, Mr. Thompson won this trip in a charity raffle. It's part of our social responsibility initiative." Samantha interrupted him with an abrupt gesture. "I don't care. I want him off this plane, now." Silence fell over the cabin. The other passengers, members of Los Angeles high society, exchanged uncomfortable glances. George, sensing the tension, slowly began to stand up. "No problem, I can take another flight," he said, his calm voice contrasting with the tense atmosphere. "No, Mr. Thompson, please stay seated," Captain Anderson intervened, turning to Samantha. "Miss Harrington, I'm sorry, but we can't just remove a passenger for no reason." Samantha's eyes narrowed dangerously. "For no reason? He smells like a kennel. This is a luxury flight, not a flying animal shelter." Murmurs of disapproval began to circulate among the other passengers. A middle-aged woman wearing a pearl necklace muttered to her husband, "What a horrible woman. The poor gentleman has done nothing wrong." George, maintaining his dignity, stood up straight. "Really, I don't want to cause any trouble. I understand that my presence may be inconvenient for some." He looked directly at Samantha, his eyes filled not with anger but with a deep sadness and understanding. Samantha, for a moment, felt something strange in her chest, a twinge of guilt, regret. She quickly pushed the feeling away, hardening her expression. "See, he wants to leave himself." "Problem solved," she said, turning to sit down. Captain Anderson, visibly uncomfortable, turned to George. "Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry about that. We can reschedule your flight for tomorrow, all expenses paid by the airline." George nodded, picking up his small suitcase. As he headed for the exit, several passengers expressed their solidarity. "This is a disgrace," said a man in an expensive suit. "You should stay, we insisted," added a young socialite. But George just smiled gently and waved. "It's all right. Sometimes people have their own demons to deal with. It never hurts to be kind." With those words, he walked down the stairs of the plane, leaving behind a group of wealthy and influential people reflecting on their own attitudes. Samantha, ignoring the disapproving looks, settled into her seat and ordered a glass of champagne. But for some reason, the taste seemed bitter in her mouth. The flight took off shortly afterwards, leaving behind not only Los Angeles Airport, but also a piece of the humanity of everyone on board. As the plane gained altitude, Samantha looked out of the window, watching the city recede. For a brief moment, she wondered about the man she had just thrown out. Who was he? What stories did he carry? But she soon pushed these thoughts aside. returning to focus on her own plans and desires. Little did she know that this seemingly insignificant encounter would be the catalyst for a profound transformation in her life. The wheels of fate were already in motion, setting the stage for a journey of self-discovery, redemption, and, above all, empathy. Meanwhile, in the airport lounge, George Thompson sat on a bench, his suitcase at his feet. He took a small drawing pad from his pocket and began to sketch. Under his deft fingers, Samantha's haughty face began to take shape on the paper, but it wasn't a portrait of anger or resentment. Instead, George captured something that not even Samantha knew she possessed: a spark of vulnerability, a glimpse of a lost soul searching for connection. "Every person has their own story," George murmured to himself, shading Samantha's eyes in the drawing. "And sometimes, the most difficult people are the ones who need understanding the most." With a sigh, he closed the drawing pad and stood up. Tomorrow would be another day, another chance to spread a little kindness around the world. And who knows, maybe one day their paths would cross again under very different circumstances. The sun was beginning to set over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. As George left the airport, carrying with him not bitterness but hope, Samantha's jet sliced through the sky above, taking her towards a destination that would change her life forever. 2 days after the airport incident, Samantha Harrington woke up in her Beverly Hills mansion, the rays of the California sun filtering through the silk curtains. She stretched luxuriously, her body resting on 1,000-thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets. For a moment, everything seemed perfect in her world of privilege, but the peace of the morning was soon interrupted by the shrill ring of her phone. It was Maxwell, her personal assistant. "Samantha, darling." Maxwell's squeaky voice sounded on the other end of the line. "Don't forget the board meeting at 10 a.m. The new product in your cosmetics line will be presented today." Samantha rolled her eyes, irritated by the intrusion. "Of course I haven't forgotten, Maxwell. I'll be there." She hung up the phone without saying goodbye and stood up, heading for her apartment-sized closet. As she sorted through dozens of designer suits, her thoughts wandered to the flight 2 days ago. For some reason, the face of the old man she had humiliated continued to haunt her. "Rubbish," she muttered to herself, pushing the uncomfortable memory away. He didn't belong on that flight, period. Half an hour later, Samantha was walking down the marble stairs of her mansion, looking impeccable in a white Chanel suit and Jimmy Choo heels. Her chauffeur, Frank Quao, was already waiting for her in the driveway with the limousine. "Good morning, Miss Harrington," Frank greeted respectfully, opening the car door. Samantha just nodded, engrossed in her smartphone as she got into the vehicle. The drive to the Harrington Cosmetics headquarters in downtown Los Angeles was quiet, with Samantha answering emails and reviewing numbers for the meeting. Upon arriving at the imposing skyscraper that housed her company's headquarters, Samantha was greeted by a crowd of eager and fawning employees. She walked through the lobby like a queen, ignoring the greetings and heading straight for the private elevator. On the 50th floor, the boardroom was already full when Samantha entered. The board members stood up, a mixture of respect and fear in their eyes. "Good morning, everyone," Samantha said coldly, taking her place at the head of the table. "Let's get started. I haven't got all day." The meeting progressed with Samantha dominating every aspect of the discussion. She mercilessly criticized others' ideas, rejected suggestions, and made impossible demands. Her new product, a revolutionary anti-aging cream, was her obsession of the moment. "I want this product to be in all the luxury department stores within a month," she declared, ignoring the panicked looks exchanged between the executives. But Ms. Harrington, a brave marketing director, dared to speak up. "The tests haven't been completed yet. We need at least 3 months to—" "I didn't ask how long you need," Samantha interrupted him abruptly. "I said what I want. Make it happen or find another job." The silence that followed was deafening. Samantha looked around the table, daring someone to contradict her. No one dared. Satisfied with her display of power, Samantha ended the meeting and left the room, leaving behind a group of stressed and demoralized executives. Back in her office, she threw herself into her Italian leather chair, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. Her gaze wandered to the window, from where she could see the whole of Los Angeles stretching out below her. It was her kingdom, built on ruthless ambition and a fierce determination never to show weakness. But why, then? Couldn't she get rid of that nagging feeling in the back of her mind? Why did the face of that old man on the plane keep appearing in her thoughts? Annoyed at her own weakness, Samantha stood up abruptly. She needed fresh air. She needed to remember who she was and what she had achieved. "Maxwell," she shouted, and her assistant appeared instantly in the doorway. "Cancel my appointments for the rest of the day. I'm going home." Ignoring Maxwell's protests about important meetings, Samantha grabbed her bag and left the office. In the elevator, she looked at herself in the mirror, adjusting an unruly lock of hair. The woman staring back at her was powerful, successful, envied. So why didn't she feel satisfied? In the building's garage, Samantha dismissed Frank and decided to drive herself. Her silver Porsche 911 was waiting, shiny and powerful. She got into the car, feeling the soft leather under her hands. The roar of the engine was comforting, a tangible reminder of her success. Samantha sped through the streets of Los Angeles, exceeding the speed limit, feeling the adrenaline rush through her veins. This was how she liked to feel, in control, powerful, untouchable. But fate had other plans for Samantha Harrington that day. Taking a sharp bend on Mulholland Drive, she lost control of the car. For a terrible moment, the world spun in slow motion. Samantha saw the guardrail approaching, heard the sound of metal twisting, felt the impact shake her body. Then everything went dark. When Samantha woke up, she was in a place she had never imagined she would visit, the emergency ward of a public hospital. The pain was intense, and the smell of antiseptic invaded her nostrils. She tried to move, but found that her right arm and left leg were in casts. Where am I?" she mumbled, her voice hoarse. A middle-aged nurse with a kind smile approached the bed. "You're in Los Angeles General Hospital, dear. You've been in a pretty nasty car accident, but don't worry, everything's going to be fine." Samantha blinked, confused and horrified. A public hospital. Her. This couldn't be happening. "There must be some mistake," Samantha said, trying to sound authoritative despite the pain. "I'm Samantha Harrington. Call my assistant immediately. I want to be transferred to a private hospital right away." The nurse, whose badge identified her as Clara, just smiled patiently. "I'm sorry, Ms. Harrington, but you're in no condition to be transferred at the moment. The doctor will explain everything shortly. For now, try to rest." Samantha closed her eyes, feeling helpless for the first time in years. Here, in this crowded, noisy hospital, her millions meant nothing. Her name didn't open doors. She was just another patient, another life in the hands of the dedicated doctors and nurses. As tiredness overtook her again, Samantha couldn't help but think of the irony of the situation. Just a few hours ago, she was on top of the world, dictating orders and shaping the destiny of her company. Now she was completely at the mercy of others. The face of the old man from the plane appeared in her mind once again, and this time, Samantha couldn't push it away. Maybe, she thought as she slipped into unconsciousness, maybe there was a lesson to be learned here. But what that lesson would be, she still didn't know. What Samantha didn't realize was that her journey of transformation had only just begun. And it would be in this unlikely setting, a public hospital in Los Angeles, that she would find the connections that would change her life forever. The constant sound of machines and the buzz of distant voices filled the hospital room where Samantha Harrington was confined. It had been a week since the accident, and the reality of her situation was beginning to settle like an uncomfortable weight on her shoulders. Samantha looked up at the stained ceiling, counting the cracks for the 100th time. Her realm of marble and glass seemed like a distant dream now, replaced by faded white walls and the lingering smell of disinfectant. The door opened, and Clara, the middle-aged nurse who looked after her, walked in with a warm smile. "Good morning, Miss Harrington. How are we feeling today?" Samantha rolled her eyes. "How do you think I'm feeling? Stuck in this place, with terrible food and without my phone." Clara wasn't put off by Samantha's harshness. Patiently, she began to check her patient's vital signs. "Well, at least her signs are improving. Dr. Ramirez will be pleased to hear that." As Clara worked, Samantha watched her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. How could this woman seem so happy, working in a public hospital, dealing with difficult patients like herself? "Why do you do it?" Samantha asked abruptly. Clara looked at her, confused. "Do what, darling?" "This," Samantha gestured vaguely with her good hand. "Work here, dealing with people like me, it must be exhausting." For a moment, Clara was silent, considering the question. Then, with a soft smile, she sat down on the edge of Samantha's bed. "You know, it wasn't always easy," Clara began, her eyes distant as if she were remembering something. "I grew up in a rough neighborhood in Los Angeles. My mother worked 2 jobs just to put food on the table. When I was 16, she got very sick." Samantha found herself paying attention despite herself. Clara continued, "We spent weeks in this same hospital. I was scared, angry at the world. But there was a nurse, Mrs. Johnson, who took care of my mother. She not only treated the physical injuries, but also gave us hope, made us smile even on the darkest days." "And that's why you decided to become a nurse?" Samantha asked, her voice softer than usual. Clara nodded. "Exactly. I realized that I could make a difference in people's lives, just as Mrs. Johnson did in mine. It's not always easy, but every smile, every thank you, every patient who leaves here better than they came in. That makes it all worthwhile." Samantha remained silent, digesting Clara's words. It was a foreign concept to her, finding satisfaction in helping others without expecting anything in return. "But what about you, Ms. Harrington?" Clara asked gently. "What motivates you?" The question took Samantha by surprise. What motivated her? Money? Power? Recognition? Suddenly, all these answers seemed empty. "I don't know," she admitted, feeling vulnerable for the first time in years. Clara smiled understandingly. "Sometimes it takes time to find out what really matters, but it's never too late to start looking." With those words, Clara got up to continue her tasks. But before she left the room, she turned to Samantha. "Oh, and about your phone, maybe this is a good time to slow down a bit. Sometimes we need to disconnect from the outside world in order to reconnect with ourselves." After Clara left, Samantha stared at the closed door, lost in thought. The nurse's words echoed in her mind, challenging everything she had ever believed to be important. Over the next few days, Samantha began to observe the hospital with new eyes. She noticed how the doctors and nurses worked tirelessly, often beyond their shifts. She saw families gathering in the corridors, sharing tears of joy and sadness. And for the first time, she began to see the people around her not as subordinates or competitors, but as human beings, each with their own story. One afternoon, while Clara was helping Samantha with her physiotherapy, the nurse casually mentioned a fundraising project for the hospital. "We're trying to raise money to buy new equipment for the pediatric ward," Clara explained. "But it's hard to compete with the big private hospitals for donations." Samantha felt a pang of guilt. How many times had she ignored requests for donations, considering them irrelevant to her goals? Maybe I can help," Samantha said hesitantly. "I know some people who might be interested in donating." Clara's face lit up. "That would be wonderful, Ms. Harrington. Any help would make a big difference to the children." That night, lying in her hospital bed, Samantha reflected on her life. She had spent years building an empire, but for what? What had she really achieved apart from amassing wealth and power? Her thoughts went back to the old man on the plane, how she had treated him so cruelly without even considering his humanity. And now, here she was, depending on the kindness of strangers like Clara. With a sigh, Samantha picked up the notepad beside her bed, her only means of communication with the outside world since her phone had been confiscated. She began to write, drawing up ideas for a fundraising campaign for the hospital. It was a small step, but perhaps it was the start of something bigger. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, George Thompson was sitting in his modest apartment, working on a new painting. The easel in front of him held an almost finished canvas depicting a scene from the animal shelter where he volunteered. George dipped his brush into a soft shade of blue, putting the finishing touches to the painting's sky. His eyes, although tired, shone with an inner light, the satisfaction of creating something meaningful. Next to him, a rescued street cat slept peacefully, a constant reminder of why he did this volunteer work. George smiled at the animal, remembering how he had found it, frightened and injured just a few weeks ago. "Look at you now, buddy," George murmured affectionately. "Who knew a little love could make such a difference, eh?" His gaze wandered to a pile of sketches on his desk. At the top was the drawing he had made at the airport, the portrait of the arrogant woman on the plane. George picked it up, studying the face he had captured on the paper. "I hope you're well wherever you are," he said softly to the drawing. "And I hope that one day you'll discover that there's more to life than status and money." George had no idea how prophetic his words were. While he continued his quiet life of art and compassion, Samantha Harrington was at the beginning of a journey of self-discovery that would lead her to question everything she had ever believed to be true. And so, in different parts of Los Angeles, two souls who had met briefly continued their separate journeys, unaware of how their paths were destined to cross again, in a way that neither of them could have foreseen. The afternoon sun seeped through the windows of Los Angeles General Hospital, casting a golden glow over the busy corridor. Samantha Harrington, leaning on crutches, walked slowly alongside Clara, her faithful nurse. It was her first day of physical therapy outside her room, and each step was a mixture of pain and triumph. "You're doing very well, Miss Harrington," Clara encouraged, her smile as warm as ever. Samantha nodded, too focused to reply. Her legs were shaking from the effort, and a thin layer of sweat covered her forehead, but there was something else in her eyes besides physical tiredness, a newfound determination. As they turned a corner, they passed the pediatric ward. Samantha stopped, her eyes catching the sight of children in various stages of treatment. Some were laughing and playing, while others looked frail and tired in their beds. "They're the ones we're raising funds for, aren't they?" Samantha asked, her voice low and thoughtful. Clara nodded. "Yes, every penny makes a difference to these children's lives." Samantha was silent for a moment, watching a small girl who was happily drawing, despite the oxygen tube in her nose. "You know, Clara, I think I have an idea to help with the fundraising." Clara's eyes lit up with interest. "Really? That would be wonderful." "Yes," Samantha continued, her mind already spinning with possibilities. "I've been thinking, what if we organized a charity auction? We could auction off unique experiences, luxury items. I know lots of people who could donate valuable items." Clara smiled broadly. "That sounds amazing, Ms. Harrington. I'm sure the hospital would be very grateful for your help." As they walked back to Samantha's room, they discussed the preliminary details of the event. For the first time in weeks, Samantha felt a spark of enthusiasm that had nothing to do with profits or personal power. Later that night, lying in her hospital bed, Samantha took out her notepad and began writing furiously. She listed names of contacts, possible auction items, ideas for organizing the event. It was an ambitious plan, but Samantha Harrington never did anything by halves. As she worked, she found herself thinking about how her life had changed in such a short space of time. Just a few weeks ago, she would have considered this kind of project a waste of time. Now, she felt an excitement she hadn't experienced for years. Across town, George Thompson was having his own epiphany. Sitting in his small makeshift studio, he was contemplating his latest series of paintings. Each canvas captured a moment of compassion and connection that he had witnessed at the animal shelter. Miguel, a young local artist George had recently met, was standing next to him, studying the works with critical eyes. "George, this is incredible," Miguel said, pointing to one painting in particular. In it, a child was hugging a rescued dog, their faces radiant with joy. "You've really captured the essence of the moment." George smiled, a light blush coloring his cheeks. "Thanks, Miguel. You know, I never thought that at 72 I'd be starting a new career as an artist." Miguel laughed. "Art has no age, my friend. And your life experience gives depth to your works." George nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I've been thinking, what if we had an exhibition, not just with my works, but with those of other local artists too? We could donate part of the proceeds to the animal shelter. Miguel's eyes widened with excitement. That's a brilliant idea, George. I know several artists who would love to take part in something like that. Over the next few days, both Samantha and George found themselves immersed in their respective projects. Samantha, still confined to hospital, used her time to meticulously plan the charity auction. She made calls, sent emails, with the help of Clara, who discreetly lent her cell phone, and began to assemble a team for the event. George, on for his part, visited local galleries, talked to other artists, and began organizing what he hoped would be an inspiring exhibition about compassion and connection. One afternoon, while Samantha was in her physiotherapy session, she heard a commotion in the hallway. Curious, she approached the door with the help of her crutches. "What's going on?" she asked a passing nurse. "Oh, it's Pet Day," he replied with a smile. "Volunteers bring pets to visit the patients. It does wonders for morale, especially among children." Samantha watched, fascinated, as dogs, cats, and even a small rabbit were brought into the patients' rooms. The children's faces lit up with joy as they interacted with the animals. At that moment, an idea popped into Samantha's mind. What if she could incorporate something similar into her charity event? Perhaps a section dedicated to adopting rescued animals. With renewed enthusiasm, she returned to her room, eager to add this new idea to her plan. As she wrote, Samantha found herself smiling. Who knew that helping others could be so satisfying? Meanwhile, George was having his own revelation. As he organized the works for the exhibition, he realized that his paintings told a bigger story, a story about the importance of empathy and connection in an often cold and indifferent world. "Miguel," George called out to his young friend, who was helping to organize the canvases. "I think we need to expand the scope of the exhibition. It's not just about rescued animals. It's about rescuing our own humanity." Miguel smiled, intrigued. "Tell me more, George." George explained his vision, an exhibition that not only showed the beauty of compassion for animals, but also explored broader themes of empathy, forgiveness, and personal transformation. "We could include stories of people who have had their lives transformed by the act of caring for others," George suggested, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Volunteers, health professionals, ordinary people who have made a difference." As George spoke, Miguel could see the exhibition taking shape in his mind. It would be something powerful, something that could touch hearts and change perspectives. "George, this is more than an exhibition," Miguel said, putting a hand on his friend's shoulder. "It's a statement, a call to action." George nodded, feeling the weight and importance of what they were about to create. "You know, Miguel, I've spent most of my life trying to be kind, to do the right thing, but now I feel I can do more, that I can inspire others to see the world in a different way." As the sun set over Los Angeles, two individuals on opposite sides of the city were embarking on parallel journeys of transformation and discovery. Samantha Harrington, the once cold and calculating cosmetics magnate, was learning the value of compassion and service. George Thompson, the gentle retiree, was discovering that his voice and his art could have an impact far beyond what he had ever imagined. And somewhere between these two worlds, fate was weaving the threads that would soon bring them together, creating a tapestry of connections that would change not only their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. Night fell over the city of angels, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings and endless possibilities. For Samantha and George, it was just the beginning of an extraordinary journey. Autumn arrived in Los Angeles, bringing with it a gentle breeze that stirred the palm trees and a sky of crystalline blue. For Samantha Harrington, fresh out of hospital and back in her Beverly Hills penthouse, the change of seasons seemed to symbolize her own inner transformation. Sitting on her balcony overlooking the city, Samantha flipped through a stack of documents, not financial reports or contracts, as would have been typical a few months ago, but detailed plans for the Los Angeles General Hospital charity auction. "Ms. Harrington," the voice of Maxwell, his assistant, interrupted his thoughts. "Ms. Chen, from the Happy Children's Foundation, is on the line. She wants to discuss donating a VIP experience at Disneyland for the auction." Samantha smiled. a gesture that still looked a little strange on her once always serious face. "Thanks, Maxwell. I'll take it." While talking to Mrs. Chen, Samantha felt a wave of excitement she hadn't experienced in a long time. Every new donation, every detail of the event that fell into place filled her with a satisfaction that no million-dollar deal had ever provided. After hanging up, Samantha picked up her cell phone and dialed a number that had become familiar over the last few weeks. "Hello, Clara. It's Samantha. I have great news about the auction." Across town, in a makeshift art studio in an old warehouse, George Thompson was putting the finishing touches to his latest work. The canvas in front of him showed a powerful scene, hands of different skin tones intertwining to form a heart. All around, silhouettes of people and animals blended in a universal embrace. Miguel, who had become not just a friend but a partner in organizing the exhibition, whistled softly when he saw the painting. "George, you've outdone yourself. That's just incredible." George smiled, blushing slightly at the compliment. "Thank you, Miguel. You know, I never thought that at 72 I'd be about to have my first big art exhibition." Miguel laughed, patting his friend on the back. "And what an exhibition! We've already got confirmation from several local artists, and interest from the community is growing every day." George nodded, his eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "I still can't believe we got the space at the Hartman Gallery. It's a dream come true." "You deserve it, my friend," Miguel said sincerely. "Your art, it touches people in a special way. It speaks straight to the heart." As the two discussed the final details of the exhibition, Miguel's phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, and then turned to George with a broad smile. "Guess what? The LA Times reporter wants to do a story on the exhibition. She wants to interview you, George." George felt a chill in his stomach. Publicity had never been his strong suit, but he knew it was important for the success of the exhibition and the message they wanted to convey. "Well," he said, taking a deep breath, "I guess it's time to get out of my comfort zone, isn't it?" In the days that followed, both Samantha and George found themselves immersed in the final preparations for their respective events. Samantha, recuperating at home, transformed her living room into a command center for the charity auction. Her apartment, once a sanctuary of cold minimalism, was now full of life, decorating samples. Lists of auction items and photos of the children in the hospital covered every available surface. One afternoon, while reviewing the VIP guest list, Samantha came across a name that gave her pause. Leonard Blackwood, CEO of one of the country's largest technology companies. "Maxwell," she called to her assistant, who was organizing invitations on the dining table. "Do you remember Leonard Blackwood?" Maxwell frowned thoughtfully. "The man who tried to buy Harrington Cosmetics 2 years ago. The one you, politely declined, in rather colorful terms." Samantha laughed, remembering how she had practically thrown Blackwood out of her office. "That's the one. I think I owe him an apology, and who knows, maybe he'd like to contribute to a good cause." Maxwell looked at her with a mixture of surprise and admiration. The Samantha of a few months ago would never have considered apologizing, let alone inviting a former rival to an event. "I'll contact his office immediately," Maxwell said, smiling. Meanwhile, George was preparing for his interview with the LA Times. Sitting in his modest apartment, he nervously adjusted the collar of his shirt as he waited for the reporter to arrive. The doorbell rang, and George opened the door to find a young woman with a bright smile and a notepad in her hand. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Rachel Winters from the LA Times. It's a pleasure to meet you." George invited her in, offering her a cup of tea, which she gratefully accepted. As they settled into the small living room, Rachel noticed the many paintings that adorned the walls. "Wow," she exclaimed, her eyes roaming over the works. "Your paintings are even more impressive in person." George smiled shyly. "Thank you. I'm still getting used to the idea that people other than the shelter cats are going to see my art." Rachel laughed, immediately putting him at ease with her warm nature. "Well, Mr. Thompson, tell me how you came up with the idea for this exhibition about empathy and connection." George took a deep breath and began to tell his story. He talked about his life as a veteran, about his years volunteering at the animal shelter, and about how an unexpected encounter at an airport inspired him to use his art to promote compassion. "You know," he said, his eyes distant for a moment, "sometimes it's the hardest moments that teach us the most valuable lessons. I met a woman at the airport. She was, well, quite rude, but instead of getting angry, I realized that she was probably struggling with her own demons. It made me think about how many people pass through our lives every day, each carrying their own story." Rachel listened intently, fascinated by the genuine kindness and wisdom emanating from the man in front of her. As the interview progressed, George felt more and more at ease. He shared his hopes for the exhibition, his desire to inspire more people to practice empathy in their daily lives. "Ultimately," George concluded, "I believe that art has the power to open hearts and minds. If we can make people stop for a moment, reflect and connect with each other's humanity, well, I think we'll have done something really special." Rachel smiled, turning off her recorder. "Mr. Thompson, I'm sure your exhibition will touch many lives. I can't wait to see it in person." When Rachel left, George sat in his favorite armchair, exhausted but satisfied. He looked at the framed sketch on the wall, the portrait of the arrogant woman from the airport. For a moment, he wondered where she was now, if anything in her life had changed. Little did he know that, on the other side of town, this same woman was in the middle of her own journey of transformation, preparing for an event that would change not only her life, but the lives of many others. Fate, with its sense of cosmic irony, was about to bring Samantha and George together once again. And this time, the meeting promised to be very different from the first. The ballroom of the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles glowed with soft lights and the palpable energy of anticipation. Samantha Harrington, stunning in a navy blue dress that highlighted her eyes, circulated among the charity auction guests, her smile genuine and warm, a sight that would have shocked those who met her just a few months ago. "Samantha, darling," a familiar voice called out. Samantha turned to see Clara, the nurse who had become a close friend, looking radiant in a simple but elegant dress. "This is incredible. I can't believe you've organized all this in such a short time." Samantha hugged Clara warmly. "I couldn't have done it without you, Clara. Your inspiration made it possible." While the two women were talking, Maxwell, Samantha's assistant, approached with a slightly worried expression. "Miss Harrington, we have a small problem. The local artist who was going to donate a painting for the auction had to cancel at the last minute. Something about a family emergency." Samantha frowned for a moment, but then her face lit up with an idea. "Maxwell, do you remember that art exhibition about empathy we saw in the paper? The one that opens tomorrow at the Hartman Gallery? Call them and see if we can get a piece for the auction. Offer whatever it takes." Maxwell nodded, impressed once again by his boss's quick problem-solving, and left to make the call. Across town at the Hartman Gallery, George Thompson was nervously adjusting his bow tie, feeling out of place in his rented suit. The preview of the exhibition, Connections, the Art of Empathy, was about to begin, and a crowd of art critics, journalists and patrons of the arts was already gathering outside. Miguel, elegant in a blue blazer, placed a comforting hand on George's shoulder. "Take a deep breath, my friend. This is your night. You deserve this." George smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Miguel. I still can't believe this is really happening." Just then, Miguel's cell phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, and then turned to George with an expression of surprise and excitement. "George, you won't believe it. I've just had a call from the Biltmore Hotel. They're holding a charity auction for Los Angeles General Hospital and want to know if we could donate one of your works to the event." George blinked, surprised. "But the exhibition opens tomorrow. All the pieces are already hung." Miguel smiled. "Actually, remember that extra painting you did? The one that didn't fit in the exhibition? We could donate that one." George thought for a moment. The painting in question was special to him. It depicted hands reaching out to each other, symbolizing connection and mutual support. It seemed appropriate to use it to help the hospital. "All right," George agreed, "but on one condition. I'll deliver it myself. I want to make sure it arrives safely." Miguel laughed. "Always the perfectionist. All right, I'll arrange for someone to cover your absence for an hour or two. The preview can start without you." So, as the first guests began to enter the gallery, George carefully picked up the wrapped painting and left for the Biltmore Hotel. Back at the auction, Samantha was on stage, ready to give her opening speech. She looked out at the crowd, seeing familiar faces from the corporate world mingling with doctors, nurses, and hospital patients. Her heart filled with an emotion she had never experienced before, a sense of purpose and connection to something bigger than herself. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice firm and warm. "A few months ago, I was a very different person. Someone who measured success in dollars and cents, in power and influence. Then a car accident took me to Los Angeles General Hospital, and my life changed forever." The crowd listened in silence as Samantha shared her journey of transformation, talking about the kindness of the hospital staff, the brave children she met, and how she learned the true value of empathy and compassion. "Tonight," she concluded, "we're not just raising funds for a hospital. We are investing in hope, in healing, in humanity. Every bid you make tonight isn't just for a luxury item or a unique experience. It's a vote of confidence in the power of human kindness. Thank you all for being here and for opening your hearts and wallets to this very important cause." Thunderous applause filled the hall as Samantha came down from the stage. Clara hugged her, tears in her eyes. "That was incredible, Samantha. You've touched every heart here tonight." At that moment, Maxwell hurried over. "Ms. Harrington, the artist from the Hartman Gallery has arrived with the painting for the auction. He's waiting in the lobby." Samantha smiled. "Great. I'll go and thank him myself. How kind of him to donate a work at such short notice." She headed for the entrance to the hall, her heart light with the success of the event so far. When she turned the corner and saw the man standing there, holding a large wrapped painting, Samantha froze. George Thompson looked up, his eyes widening in recognition. For a moment they both stood there, staring at each other in shock. "You," Samantha whispered, memories of the day at the airport flooding her mind. George, overcoming his initial surprise, offered a gentle smile. "Hello again. It seems that fate has an interesting sense of humor, doesn't it?" Samantha felt a rush of emotions, shame, regret, but also a strange sense of relief. Here was her chance to right a big wrong. I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "for what happened at the airport. I was a terrible person back then." George shook his head gently. "There's no need to apologize. We all have our difficult moments. What's important is how we choose to grow from them." Samantha felt tears forming in her eyes. "You're very kind, kinder than I deserve." "On the contrary," George said, his eyes shining with understanding, "I think you deserve every bit of kindness the world has to offer, especially considering the wonderful job you're doing here tonight." At that moment, something changed between them. What had started out as an unpleasant encounter months ago had turned into something new, a connection based on mutual understanding and forgiveness. "Would you like to tell me about your painting?" Samantha asked, pointing to the wrapped work in George's hands. George's face lit up. "It would be a pleasure. Actually, this painting was inspired by our meeting at the airport. It's about how even the most difficult moments can lead to new connections and understandings." As George began to unwrap the painting, Samantha felt a surge of emotion. She knew that this moment, this unlikely reunion, was more than a coincidence. It was the universe offering a second chance, an opportunity for redemption and to forge a new connection based on empathy and mutual understanding. And so, in the middle of a packed ballroom, two souls who had once been at odds found a new beginning. The charity auction and art exhibition were just the backdrop to something much bigger, a living lesson in the transformative power of empathy and forgiveness. The rising sun painted the Los Angeles sky in shades of pink and orange, a new day unfolding over the City of Angels. On the terrace of the Biltmore Hotel, Samantha Harrington and George Thompson were sitting side by side, mugs of steaming coffee in their hands, watching the city awaken. The night before had been a whirlwind of emotions and events. The charity auction had been a resounding success, raising much more than expected for Los Angeles General Hospital. George's painting, unveiled at the end of the evening, had sparked a bidding war, eventually being snapped up for a sum that left them both stunned. I still can't believe it, George muttered, shaking his head in amazement. I never imagined that my art could do so much good. Samantha smiled, her eyes shining with a mixture of admiration and regret. Your art does good because it comes from a place of genuine goodness, George. Something it took me a long time to understand. George turned to her, his gaze gentle and understanding. You know, Samantha, when we first met at the airport, I saw something in you. It wasn't just arrogance or coldness. It was pain, loneliness. And now, looking at you, I see a completely changed person. Samantha felt tears forming in her eyes. I was so lost, George, so focused on success and power, that I forgot what really matters in life. It took a car accident and weeks in a public hospital for me to realize how wrong I was. Sometimes, George said softly, we need to fall down to learn how to get up again. The important thing is what we do with the lessons we learn. They sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on their individual journeys which, by a quirk of fate, had become so unexpectedly intertwined. What now? Samantha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Where do we go from here? George smiled, his eyes lighting up with an idea. Well, my exhibition officially opens today. Would you like to be my guest of honor? Samantha laughed, a genuine, joyful laugh she couldn't remember giving in years. I'd be honored, George, and maybe we can think of ways to unite our efforts, your art, my contacts. Imagine how much good we could do together. George's eyes widened at the possibilities. Samantha, I think you've just come up with a brilliant idea. A few hours later, the Hartman Gallery was packed with visitors eager to see the exhibition Connections, the Art of Empathy. George, and with Samantha by his side, guided the guests through the works, explaining the meaning behind each piece. They stopped in front of a particularly moving painting, the same one George had sketched at the airport after his first meeting with Samantha. On the canvas, two figures stood with their backs to each other, but their shadows reached out, touching and intertwining. This, George explained, his voice soft but charged with emotion, is about how sometimes our most difficult moments can be the catalyst for the deepest connections. Samantha, looking at the painting, felt a wave of emotion run through her. It was as if George had captured not just that moment at the airport, but the whole journey that had taken her there. Among the visitors, Clara, the nurse who had looked after Samantha in hospital, watched the scene with a knowing smile. She approached the pair, her eyes shining with joy. Samantha, George, she greeted warmly. I see you two have finally met properly. Samantha hugged Clara, tears of gratitude in her eyes. Clara, without you, none of this would be possible. You showed me a path that I didn't even know existed. George, us intrigued, looked between the two women. There seems to be a story here that I'd love to hear. And so, in the middle of the gallery, surrounded by works of art that spoke of connection and empathy, the three of them sat down and shared their stories. They laughed, cried, and marveled at the twists of fate that had brought them here. As the day progressed, it became clear that something special was being born. Visitors to the exhibition, inspired by George's works and Samantha's story of transformation, began to share their own experiences of empathy and connection. A young businessman, moved by Samantha's story, announced that he was going to start a volunteer program at his company. An elderly woman, touched by one of George's paintings, decided to reconcile with her daughter after years of estrangement. At the end of the day, when the last visitors had left and the gallery was silent, Samantha and George met again in front of the painting depicting their first meeting. George, Samantha said, her voice full of purpose, I think we've found something here, something bigger than both of us. George nodded, understanding immediately. A way to spread empathy and connection beyond these walls. Exactly, Samantha continued, excited. What if we created a foundation, something that brought art and social action together? We could organize exhibitions like this all over the country, use my corporate contacts to raise funds, create education programs about empathy. George's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. And we could work with schools, hospitals, shelters, use art as a tool to teach empathy and promote healing. As they discussed their ideas, Miguel and Clara joined them, offering their own suggestions and insights. Soon, the quartet was immersed in a whirlwind of planning and possibilities. Weeks passed, and the seed planted in that gallery blossomed into something extraordinary. The Empathy Connections Foundation was officially launched at an emotional ceremony at Los Angeles General Hospital. Samantha, standing at the podium, looked out at the gathered crowd. Doctors, nurses, patients, artists, entrepreneurs, all united by a common purpose. "A few months ago," she began, her voice tight and full of emotion, "I was lost. I thought success meant power and wealth. But thanks to an accident, an incredible nurse, and a kind artist, I learned that true success lies in the connections we make, in the empathy we show each other." She paused, her eyes meeting those of George in the front row. He smiled encouragingly, and she continued, "This foundation is more than just a charity project. It's a movement, a call for all of us to look beyond our differences, beyond our own struggles, and see the humanity in every person we meet. Because in the end, we are all connected, and it is through this connection that we can heal not only ourselves, but the world around us." As the audience applauded, Samantha came down from the stage and joined George, Clara, and Miguel. Together, they cut the ribbon, symbolizing the official start of the foundation. That evening, long after the ceremony had ended, Samantha and George were back on the terrace of the Biltmore Hotel, watching the city lights. "Who knew," Samantha said softly, "that terrible day at the airport would bring us here?" George laughed softly. "The universe works in mysterious ways, doesn't it?" Samantha nodded, feeling a peace she had never experienced before. "You know, George, I spent most of my life thinking I was building an empire, but now I realize that what we're doing here, together, that's the real legacy." George took Samantha's hand, squeezing it gently. "And it's only the beginning, my dear, just the beginning." As the sun set over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Samantha and George stood side by side, their hearts filled with gratitude and hope. They had started out as strangers, separated by prejudice and misunderstanding. Now they were united in a common purpose, ready to spread the message of empathy and connection to a world that desperately needed it. And so, as dusk gave way to starry night, a new journey began, not just for Samantha and George, but for all those whose lives would be touched by the Empathy Connections Foundation. It was a new dawn, full of infinite possibilities and the transformative power of human compassion. If this story touched your heart, then don't forget to leave a like. Use the super thanks located just below the video to directly support the channel and help create more amazing content. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Now don't miss the next incredible story that's appearing on your screen. I greatly appreciate your support and hope to see you soon. Thank you for watching.